Hi Notion ears. Today I'm going to show you how you can use Zapier to sync your Google Calendar events into Notion, whether that's when the event is newly added to your calendar, it's updated, or it's been cancelled. The Notion API came out yesterday, which is really exciting, and I saw a lot of people who are keen to set up this integration, so I thought I'd make this demo of how to do it. You can just copy the Zaps which I've set up here from this page inside that toggle block right there. But I'm going to show you how I've set those up in case you need to edit them at all. The only thing that's worth bearing in mind at this point is this integration is effectively going to be read-only. So you'll be able to sync your calendar events into Notion with no issues, but you won't be able to edit those events details inside Notion and have those changes sync back into your Google Calendar. That will be something that will be possible in the future. It's just that Notion's new API doesn't support webhooks at the moment, which means you can't trigger updates to other systems when something is changed inside Notion. But watch this space because I'm sure they'll have that functionality ready pretty soon. You can update the pages inside the database anyway, of course, but if the event is changed, then your changes may be overridden, depending on how you've configured your Zaps. So you just need to be a little bit careful of that. But basically what I've done here is I've set up 3 different Zaps, one to handle new events being created, one to handle events being updated, and a third to handle events being cancelled. There is a way to set up a single Zap to handle both new and updated calendar events, but not cancelled events as well. Essentially all you need to do is add in a path step. So you'll do a search for your calendar event inside your existing calendar Notion database. If the event is found, then you would obviously just update the event once the automation has been triggered. And if the event isn't found, you would just create a new row or a new page inside the database to store the details of the new event that's just been added to your calendar. But if you do that, you'll have made a multi-step Zap. And at the moment, you need to be paying $19.99 a month on the starter plan in order to use those Zaps. So what I've done instead is set up these Zaps as standalone Zaps. So you've got 3 there. You can have up to 100 tasks a month for free in this plan, and hopefully that'll save at least some of you a little bit of money. So this is the better option to go for. It will obviously make your Zapier dashboard a little bit more messy, but I think that's probably going to be worth it for most people. You're probably wondering why there's a separate Zap for cancelled events when you would think that updating an event to cancel it would just trigger the update automation. It looks like Zapier handles cancelled events differently, probably because they're actually being deleted when they're cancelled, and so you do always need to have at least 2 Zaps handling this process so that you've got all 3 scenarios covered. So next I'll just walk you through the structure of the database that I've set up to store the details of my events inside. This is a very simple calendar view which I've created. And essentially what we've got here is the name, which will be the name of the meeting in your Google Calendar. We've got start and end date columns right here where you'll store the date and time when the meeting is scheduled to take place. This channel column allows you to distinguish between calls and maybe in-person meetings or other types of events which you're adding to your calendar. And then we've got a column where you can store the attendee email addresses so that when your calendar event syncs into Notion, you can easily see which client the event is related to. I wouldn't recommend using that column to store your contacts' email addresses as the primary place to keep that information. I would want to link this calendar database to my contacts database, which would have all of the information about the contacts that are going to be attending these events inside them, including their email addresses. But the Zapier automations can't look up people from the contacts database at the moment. So instead, we're just going to feed this information in so that when you go through your list of calendar events, it's nice and easy to see which ones should be linked to which contacts and which companies inside your CRM system. There's also a column here where you will store the link to the calendar event inside your Google Calendar, which will look something like this. This is a really important column, not just because it gives you quick access to the calendar event when you click the link, but also because this is what we'll use to identify the or distinguish between the different calendar events that are in your Notion database, so that when we go to update the details of a particular event when it's been changed in Google Calendar, we'll know that we're updating the correct event. I'll explain how that works in a little bit more detail in just a second. Then we've got a cancelled column here, which is just a simple checkbox. The reason we've got this there is because Zapier can't delete rows or pages from your Notion databases at the moment. So instead, what we're going to do is when an event is cancelled, we'll have our Zap check this checkbox, and that will filter it out of the database views using these filters. And the other column that we've got in here for filtering is this complete formula column, which just checks whether or not the end date of your event is in the past. And if it is, that checkbox will be checked. So then we've got a filter on this database view, which will filter out any events which are either complete or are cancelled. Just to show you how that looks in practice, if I check this checkbox here for a cancelled event, that will be removed from this view, and then it will show up in this database view, which is filtered to show cancelled events, just like that. One other important detail about the start and end date columns, I would always recommend having separate columns to store dates like this in. You can include an end date in a date property inside one of these columns, but A, those are quite fiddly to work with. B, it doesn't look like those are actually supported by Zapier at the moment, so you would run into problems there. And C, there is other Notion functionality like timeline views, which just work, which are just a lot easier to use if you have those separate columns there. So that would be my suggestion. When it comes to adopting these apps and using them for yourself, this database on this page can also be duplicated. So when you go to this page, which I'll have a link to in the description of the video, you can not only duplicate the Zaps from here, but you can also duplicate this and move it into your workspace. If you've downloaded one of my templates in the past, like my advanced CRM template, I've just gone in and updated the date column to make that the start column, and then you've got a new end column in there, as well as a couple more to store the details that we need to capture in order to manage this automation. It's nice and straightforward for you to just add those columns in and make those changes, but if you're downloading this template for the first time in the future, then those columns will be in there for you, ready to start using straight away and get your CRM connected up to this automation. Now, before you can set up these apps to get this automation going, you will just need to connect Notion with Zapier. And I'm not going to show you how to do that as part of this walkthrough because the process might change in the future, but I've included a link to Notion's guide to that process, which is nice and straightforward, just at the top of the page there. So you can just follow the steps in that guide, and in a couple of minutes, you'll be ready to start configuring your Zaps. And we'll get straight into that now. So first of all, we're going to set up a Zap to handle events which are newly added to your Google Calendar. So I'm just going to create a new Zap. You want to choose Google Calendar as the app which Zapier is checking on to see whether or not the automation should be triggered. And then the trigger event here would be new event. Next, just select your Google Calendar account. that you want to sync your events from, and I'm going to choose my demo calendar here, which I've set up for this demo. We'll just test that. So Zapier is just going to have a look through that calendar and try and find an event, and then it's going to use those details as we work our way through the rest of this setting up process in order to give us some sense of what is going to be inserted into which columns when we go to sync the data into Notion. And next we want to select Notion as the app which should be updated by this action. That should have the Notion logo there. There's obviously a little bit of a bug. And then we want to create a database item in this case. So this is going to add a new row or a new page to our database to store the details of the Google Calendar event inside when this Zap is triggered. We want to select our Notion account as the one that Zapier should use for this. And then I just need to choose my calendar database, which I've set up for this demo right there. So now we have connected up our two systems. Basically, we're ready to start defining what should be filled out in which columns when we sync our Google Calendar event data into Notion. First of all, we want the name column to be the summary, so that's just going to be the name of the event. Then for the calendar event link, you just need to open up this drop down and select HTML link right there. As I mentioned before, this is a really important column because it acts as the identifier that we're going to use when we need to figure out which page inside our Notion database we need to update when the Google Calendar event has been updated, and we're handling that process in a separate Zap, so don't skip that step. Next up, we've got our channel. So Zapier has picked up the different options which I've got to choose from inside my drop-down column in the database. For me, this would always be set to call because all of my meetings with clients are calls. If you have in-person meetings though with clients, or you're storing other types of events in your Google Calendar, then maybe you would just want to leave that blank. We can skip the cancel column for now because we're not handling cancelled events in this Zap. And then for the end date, here you just need to be a little bit careful because there's actually a couple of different formats for your dates and times for these events. There's the pretty version, which is right here, and then I guess this is the ugly version, which is the format that you're going to want to choose so that Notion recognizes the data that's fed in from Zapier. Then for the start column, you just want to choose the equivalent field for the start. And attendee email addresses would be not the creator email or the organizer email. You just want to keep scrolling down until you get to the attendee emails right there. Lastly, for the content, this is the content that will be entered inside the page itself in the body of the page. So for that, I would just choose the description so that you've got all of the details about the event being fed into your Notion page, and you're ready to start writing notes about the event and everything else in there. So next up, Zapier is just going to run a quick test to try adding one of these events to our Notion database and make sure that everything is working correctly. And you can see here the test was successful. So if we go back to our database right here, we've now got a duplicate of the coaching call event, funnily enough, which is showing up just there. The only other thing which I've forgotten to do is name the Zap. So we can call this new calendar event. And then lastly, we are ready to switch on our Zap. You can copy a link to your Zap and share it with others, but obviously you don't need to do that in order to get this working. And now we're ready to go. Our Zap's enabled and we can try it out. So that's the process for creating a Zap to handle new calendar events. Next up, we'll create a Zap to handle updates to our events. And this time I'm gonna name the Zap first. So we'll call this updated calendar event. We want to choose Google Calendar as our app again. And the trigger event now will be a new or updated event. You can ignore the fact that this will be triggered when an event is newly added to your calendar. We'll only use this Zap to handle the updated events. And we're just going through the same steps as I did in that previous, when I was setting up that previous Zap here. So I won't explain all of this again. But now Zapier has found an event in there in our Google Calendar, so we know that connection is working fine, and then we can just choose Notion again as the app that we want to connect. And this time we want to first of all, we want to find our database item which we should be updating. Choose Google, our Notion account again. And for our database, again, this will just be the calendar database. So now we need to define what Zapier should look for in order to identify the page that needs updating. So you can ignore the name column. You can definitely ignore that column. That's not a column which is used for the search criteria. But what we want to do is choose the calendar event link column and select our HTML link once again there. You could use the ID instead as the identifier, obviously, and feed that from Google Calendar into your Notion database. The reason I haven't done that is it's more useful to be able to actually click on the link to your calendar event and have that open up the calendar event details in Google Calendar. So at least that has a little bit of practical use as well as being used as the identifier for this automation. And then you can ignore this field right here completely. That is set to the right value already. Next up, we're going to test the search, see if Google can find an event in our database which matches one of the events which are already in my Google Calendar. That's worked fine, so we're ready to go to the next step now. And then we can choose Notion again and connect up our account. And this time we want to update a database item. Okay, so once we've chosen that again, this is where we're going to be using the ID of the page that we just found in that find step. So rather than choosing an ID from here, which will obviously always be different depending on which calendar item was updated, you just need to switch to custom there. Go to the find database item in Notion section here and select the ID column. So what's happened there is when Zapier did the search for an event inside our Notion database which had an event URL that matched an event URL inside Google Calendar, which was for the updated event, Zapier retrieved the ID of the page, the Notion page that it found, and so now we have that available to us, and we can tell Zapier that that's the ID that it should look for when it goes to update the particular page that we want updating. Now we can go through and populate the same set of fields again with all of the information that we wanted to insert in the first place when we added the event to our calendar the first time. We don't need to insert the calendar event link again though, because we can assume that that's already there, as this app needed to find that in the first place in order to identify which page should be updated. But we will, and again with the channel, that's not information that's being fed in from Zapier, so we don't need to populate that again. But the end time for the event might have changed, of course, so we can just open this up, select that end date and time there, and the start date and time could have changed as well. So we'll just update that. The attendees might have been changed, so we'll select the attendee emails. And for the content, I'm actually not going to configure the Zap to update the content in the page because, as I mentioned, if you end up writing notes inside any of these pages, then if we did set this Zap to update the page content again once the calendar event had been updated, you would lose the notes that you had entered inside the page itself. So I'm just going to assume that the events description hasn't been changed, and therefore we can just skip that step right here. But I think on balance, although you might have manually edited some of these other event details here, the chances are you'll want those changes to be overridden when the event's updated. So that's the logic there. Okay, so now we're going to send a database item to Notion and try to update the database item which is already in our database. So that was successful and we are ready to go. Okay, lastly, we just need to create a Zap to handle cancelled calendar events. So I'm just going to do that now. And go through the same process, but the trigger this time will be event cancelled. And we're ready to go. We can just select Notion there, and the action event this time again will first of all be a find, because we need to know which event entry inside our Notion database has been cancelled. So this is basically the same process that we went through in order to create that last Zap to handle updated calendar events. So we're going to use the event link again to identify the event which should be updated. Okay, and nothing could be found that time when we did the search, but that's fine. We know that this will work, so we can just skip the test right there. Maybe not. Okay, then we're ready to go through and update the Notion page itself. So we want to update the database item now. Connect our Notion account. And this time, once again, we need to find the database item in Notion, or sorry, we need to use the ID of the page that was found from that previous step. And the only thing that we need to update is the cancelled column. So in Notion, a checkbox, or any other system for that matter, a checkbox is false if it's unchecked and it's true if it's checked. By default, every checkbox will be unchecked, so all you need to do is set that to true, and that will check the cancelled checkbox for you, and we'll filter that out of our calendar views. So that's the only column that we need to update in this instance, because you're not going to need to worry about the rest of the details for this calendar event in the future anyway. But if you wanted to, you could feed through the other details about the event into your Notion page once again, just in case they had been changed and that was important information for you to have. So this isn't going to work once again, which is fine. It couldn't find a matching page because Zapier had just created a random ID for us there. But now we can just turn on this Zap and we're ready to go. So that's how you go about setting up all three of those apps there. You've now got every scenario covered when it comes to automating the syncing between your calendar and Notion. In my experience, although the new and updated Zaps are supposed to be triggered instantly and feed information about new calendar events and updated calendar events into Notion straight away, in reality, I found that can take up to 10 minutes to happen. So it's not quite an instant automation, but it is pretty close. And this will obviously give you that up-to-date visibility of everything that's going on in your calendar right there in Notion. So I hope that was useful. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to add your questions in the comments. Yeah, you can just click through to the Notion page, which I've got set up here, to download the Zaps that I've configured as part of this demo, duplicate this database here as a template into your own workspace, and get started with your automating. I will be creating lots more videos like this probably to share different automations that you can set up with Zapier and the new Notion API. Let me know if there's any others that you would like me to show you how to set up as well in the comments.